Welcome to the Entry Level Left. My name is Nathan.
I'm Jared.
I'm Matt.
And tonight we're talking about the workplace under capitalism. In the past, we did talk a little bit about labor, but we wanted to revisit these kind of ideas and talk a little bit about the kind of workplace culture that capitalism encourages. We're going to jump right into that, asking the very basic question, why work in the first place?
Obviously, this has a lot to do with, the concept of modes of production, like we talk about, like in terms of society, modern society. We've kind of settled into agrarian societies where we grow our own food. We don't have to constantly follow a nomadic lifestyle. So with the advent of that, we're kind of set in this modern society where we kind of have to work to produce. So I think people should understand that it's work, labor, and creativity are intrinsically tied, and they're very important to human beings and the way we socialize and the way that we gain fulfillment and actualize ourselves. So obviously work is something very important regardless of whether it's under socialism or capitalism. The problem is how you produce and who's reaping the benefits from that. Is it are we producing for need, as we've talked about before? Are we producing for competition in a free market? So why we have to work, depends kind of on the system. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're going to have to work either way, most likely, because, that's a part of being, a human in modern society. But the problem is more in relation to the mode of production in which we live.
Right.
Yeah.
I think, too, it's if you could even better refine this question, it's why do we work, or why do we have to work under capitalism, right? Because we've always worked in some way or another. We're always going to work in some form of another. Even when we talk about a world without work, and automation and all that sort of stuff, it's you're still, it's not that you're not going to work anymore. It's that the work that you do is going to change. Your work might be more leisure oriented or arts focused or, you name it. But why do we work under capitalism? It's kind of, as Matt was saying, there's kind of this evolutionary process to it. It's you have the advent of the agricultural revolution and sedentary societies and working for need, and then having surplus product that leads to, the more advanced development of societies, trade, feudalism to capitalism. And when we say, why do we work under capitalism, there's only one reason why we work, and that's to
obtain the value form.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And what that means is to essentially to produce products through our own labor that are then in turn sold on the market for a profit of a particular capitalist. And in turn, we receive a wage that is intended to sustain our housing, our healthcare, our education, so on and so forth.
So it's the marketizing.
So why do we work? It hasn't changed that much in the sense that we're still working to provide a set of needs, but who and what we are working for and why we're doing, excess work or what have you has changed throughout time.
It has to do with the market. You know what I
Yes.
mean? We've talked about before. Capitalism explicitly creates a market for everything. Everything becomes a commodity. Even the laborer themselves becomes a commodity. And I think it's sort of important to dispel this this libertarian or capitalist myth that all actions and all things under capitalism are just voluntary trades or voluntary exchanges of either material or labor or service or things like that.
Like you have a choice.
Yeah, because, if you take capitalism, sort of dissect it from a macroeconomic level, you kind of see that not only is work necessitated to be able to sustain yourself in a market, to be able to purchase goods and purchase products and housing and things that people need to reproduce their lives in society, but you're also being forced to do those things because you can't really get away from the system. You know what I mean? Without prior capital or without some type of inheritance, you are pretty much forced into this system that is very much not voluntary. To be able to reproduce and obtain the products of society that you need because of the way things are distributed.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very natural, logical progression. It's when the average person turns 18, they leave home, they have nothing. There's nothing for
Right.
them to sell. They own nothing.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They start renting. Well, they need a paycheck to get rent. So what are they going to do? They got to work. Okay, well, they also got to take on a car loan because how the hell are you going to get to work
Right.
without a car?
Well,
And all these things
where
stack
we live.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah, all these things stack up just so quickly. The only thing you have to sell is your labor. You know, you have no power beyond that. And so it really creates this dynamic of work or die.
In the
You know,
marketplace.
there's nothing else to do. Yeah,
in terms of the marketplace, you really, a lot of people, most people are working class, and so we really only have our time and our labor to be able to sell. We have no, prior or inherited capital. Like, I left home at like 18, 19 with $700 that my parents saved up my whole life for me.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think I ended up like working and then spending that and the rest of the money I made from work on a car so that I could get to work. You know
I think
what I mean?
the central point for this episode is just that you need to work. Everybody's going to work.
Right.
That's the expectation.
Right.
You know what I mean? In fact, when someone doesn't work, it feels weird. You're like, wait, what do you do for a living?
But
You know?
also going back to that
Socially,
point
yeah.
of like, it's not that you're not going to work under another system or
Yeah.
in prior systems, but it's to particularly we're looking at and to dispel the notion of the fact that what we're doing and how we're spending our time and what we're working on currently, it's not voluntary. It's not democratic. It's not something that we have a say in. It's
Right.
not something that we control because we really don't. We don't have control over our own labor.
Take for example like the way most corporations function. They have a board of directors usually. You have stockholders and shareholders, and depending on your stake in the company, that influences how much say you have in like the financial direction or the investment direction of the company. And like at that level, maybe you have a little bit of democratic sway, but thinking about like the majority of the workforce of a major corporation, those people have no democratic control over their work environments, their pay, unless, they're using a body or an institution like a union.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's, something we've talked about in a previous episode. But, why we have to work is really dictated a lot. Like a lot of the details of why we have to work and the conditions that we work under are dictated by the economic system that we live within. So like capitalism, it's we'll talk about it a little bit later on tonight, but it by virtue of it existing introduces a class hierarchy. There's no way like around that. So this idea, this mythology that everything is just voluntary transaction, voluntary trade, and if you don't like it, then you can just go find another employer. But the problem with that is like it's not the individual employers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's the whole system creating
Right.
a market
Correct.
and normalizing
Correct.
prices. And capitalists completely understand the class dynamic because they're always in the interest of trying to do price controls or negotiate prices between sectors of industry so that they can basically control the process of profit and normalize it across all people. Capitalists really don't want competition.
Yeah.
They fundamentally don't.
There's always this sort of underlying idea that you can just go to a different company, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the propaganda. Like, oh, if you don't want to work at this job, just go to a different one.
Yeah, if you don't
But
like
here's the
Coke,
thing.
go to Pepsi.
Full employment, quote unquote, is 3%. Like 3% of people who want to work are still unemployed in quote unquote full employment.
Right.
So that means that
Under a
there's
capitalist system.
always somebody willing to take a job.
Right.
The
The
so if you
liquid
say
labor
like,
pool,
no,
yeah.
this is fucked. I don't want to do this. And every job you go to says this is fucked. I want to do this. Congrats, you just joined the 3% of people unemployed.
I mean, it's
there's
also-
always someone there to take your place if they need.
But it's also
It's
limited.
required.
It's also limited by other variables like your skill set. Like say you have a particular skill set, and it involves mostly retail experience. Where you're going to be able to go and move around to, like as in terms of your social mobility, is going to be limited by
Very
your
limited.
experience. And then if you take, for example, we'll probably do an episode on it, but the university system, especially in the U.S.
Right.
I mean, for me, someone who's going back to school now, it's very, very difficult, what I mean, to work full time, and pay for school and do this all on your own. And I mean, that kind of pressure is not always like bearable for a lot of people, especially like people who are like single mothers or, people who are older.
Right.
Like they don't have the ability to go and back to school and increase their skill level necessarily.
Well, and it's like even for someone like me, who has a specialized degree from a university and works in their field that they went to school for, with the amount of experience I have or will get over the years, there's a very, very small set of fields I could go into besides the one that I'm in now. I mean, it's literally like only one other field. And what we were all talking about before too is, when we talk about capitalism, we talk about it in these terms of competition, and we also talk about it in terms of competition for the worker. Like, you have all these choices, and you can, if you don't like Uber, you can go to Lyft. If you don't like Microsoft, you can go to Apple. If you don't like Coke, you can go to Pepsi, whatever. But the reality is, yes, as you were stating earlier, they're all involved in embedded in maintaining the exact same structure, the price fixing, the whatever, so that realistically you don't have that much choice. And as we had talked about on previous episodes,
like our food industry,
right? And as we talked about on previous episodes, like when you talk about competition under capitalism, you have to ask, what are they competing for? And it's total
What's the goal?
It's total domination of their sole industry. And the further and further away we move from socialism, the more neoliberal, the less regulation, the less union power,
more monopoly,
the more and more they get closer to that end goal of monopoly. And that's where we're at today.
It feels like companies in general, speaking about the whole market, always have advantages over the workers. I mean, we've done other episodes on this, but there seems to be this culture where, like, for example, there's just little traditions that are always in the company's favor. Mm-hmm. A company can lay you off today. Right. They probably will. They're not going to give you a 3-week warning that they're going to lay you off. They're going to bring you in the office. They're going to say, hey, the sales are down. You got to kind of get out of here. Yeah. But when you want to leave, you got to give them a notice. They got to find somebody to replace you.
Yep.
We're thinking 2 weeks is good. It seems like there's a lot of sort of like little advantages that companies get in employing people.
Yeah.
Can you guys think of like any others that are kind of like that?
Well, I mean, that's a good point you brought up, because the deck is already stacked in that point, because if you're leaving in a company that you work for, they want 2 weeks notice, and you not giving them that 2 weeks notice actually will harm you, because if, say, your other employer wants to talk to a reference that you have from your current employer that you didn't give 2 weeks notice to, they're probably not going to leave a very favorable review of you as a worker.
And all the higher like level positions require that. Most of them require 3 or 2 references or whatever.
But I mean, there are so many, laws and cultural norms that I think are inherently anti-worker, and kind of further the reproduction of this very like work productive culture and mindset throughout the actual everyday American worker. I mean, and a lot of it has to do with stuff we've talked about on previous episodes, like right to work laws, which allow a worker to get all the benefits of being in a union without actually paying their dues, allows for the union to effectively get entirely defunded.
Which seems like, when you kind of look at it like from a neoliberal perspective, it seems kind of like you're getting more choice.
Yes.
You know what I mean? But it's really, it doesn't amount to that. What it amounts to is that you're busting up the union, you're disempowering the union because you're taking away its funding. But like on a surface level, to like a liberal, it looks like a positive choice, because you're getting the option to like pay the union due, and rather than have to pay union dues to get the benefits. And it's like, it's very insidious, because you would think like if you're not educated on like class analysis and things like that, you would see on its face it looks like a good thing, like you're getting more choice. But really, it's just a very insidious way that the capitalist class has come up with, basically disinvesting unions and creating less support for them and less funding.
And when it comes to labor, I think there's a lot of changes that you can make even within our current system that would make workers' lives better. This doesn't require like a communist revolution.
It's been done before, right?
Yeah, like for example, I just learned a few weeks ago that in Canada, if they change anything major about your job description, like for example, a schedule, like if they decide like, hey, you're usually 8 to 5, but we want to change you from 11 to 8 or something like that. Anything substantial that changes like that, and even in the job duties themselves, they actually qualify you for unemployment. So if you want to say, no, I don't want to change to an 11-8 to schedule, the government will actually just give you full unemployment. Whereas
Right.
in the U.S., they won't do that.
No, yeah.
Your job is
You don't have
allowed
a
to do
choice.
anything to you.
Right.
You can sign an offer letter that says, I do this job, I get paid this much, I do this, and I work this schedule. They can change every one of those things, including your pay. As long as they pay you minimum wage, they can change your pay at any time to anything that they want. They have to inform you, of course, but that just creates a weird worker dynamic where like, what? Like you're at their whim. You know what I mean? They can just decide like tomorrow, like, actually we're bringing you down to minimum wage. You know, you accept it or you leave.
Well,
like,
and
that's what it is.
I think that's particularly, the case with, I mean, I feel like that happens all the time, but I feel like it's particularly associated with large scale corporations who mainly back in the day, let's say auto manufacturers, when they were looking to cut costs, would be able to change someone's schedule or whatever it is that their job description was, like at the drop of a hat. But I think in particular where you see that even more nowadays, where you see that really, kind of come to fruition is more in the small business sector.
Yeah.
You have a startup or you have a kind of a new company comes along, and when they hire their employees or their staff, they kind of sucker you in with the fact that it's family owned, it's a startup, it's all these new innovative things. It kind of makes you feel like you're more connected to it, but with that, they also are able to exert a lot more dominance over your schedule, how much authority you have within advocating for your own labor rights, and so on and so forth.
They try to hide the atomization, but in reality, it's oftentimes worse in those type of environments because, everybody's heard like the old sayings or like the memes that are going around on Facebook, like, don't skip that vacation because your job will literally replace you.
Right.
Yeah.
Take for example, like in recent news, we heard about the fucking police literally gunning down that UPS person that was held hostage by burglars or robbers, and they completely just like lit up that UPS van. And didn't need to do that. Like
in the middle of like killed another civilian.
And UPS
like,
posted a status like immediately after
thanking
praising
the cops. And literally they would not pay for anything. And I'm pretty sure like there was a GoFundMe started when UPS should have done the right thing.
And as we're recording this episode, they've already replaced that motherfucker. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
they've already hired someone else.
That dude who was killed
for less money.
That dude who was killed, regardless of what his exactly. They already replaced him with some temp driver.
And they pay less
for less.
Yeah, for less money.
Yeah,
guaranteed.
Another big thing too for me personally, because I work a lot in the HR realm, is a lot of the accommodations that are written into law, like the American Disabilities Act, civil rights type of dialogue kind of going on, all the legislation in that area. A lot of it is dependent on not creating an undue burden. So like when you're in HR, it's kind of weird because people can come to you and say like, well, I have this specific disability, and then we have to evaluate on our side, well, does this cause a problem for business need? One of the most common ones that I get at work is people will say something like, well, I have church services on Sunday, right? And businesses, as long as they can say, that causes an undue burden, we have to schedule somebody else, we don't want to do that, they can just ignore most of those laws.
Of course,
most of those laws are written with the business in mind. Like I think it's interesting because it's like we've sort of made like the actual business element of it more important than the people element of it. Like the business will always exist. The people, we can replace them. You know what I mean? Like it's formalized right in those laws that are supposedly really progressive protections for us,
Yeah.
There's a lot of different places where people can work. One of the most common, about like 47.5% of people, according to the USBA, work in small businesses. Other podcasts like the infamous Chapo Trap House have talked a lot extensively about things like small business tyrants, right? So a lot of people are kind of exposed to the small business culture, and yeah, like how do we feel about that?
I mean, I think the way small businesses are always brought up are very, very like advantageously by like the ruling class, specifically to rewrite or reorient laws that seem like they would otherwise benefit like small businesses. So
yeah,
right to work.
It's like I look at the small business class as like an incubator for like the aristocracy.
Right, yeah.
You know what I mean? And their ideology.
So a few examples of that, though, is not only like right to work being one of those, but also instances in which, let's say politicians. I remember Paul Ryan, when he was still in the House, was really big on this, would say, we need to cut taxes so that small mom and pop businesses can have a better fighting chance at this, that, and the other. Okay.
Yeah.
First of all, he doesn't give a fuck about small businesses, but that does appeal to small businesses, owners.
Yeah.
Because the reality is, if you're a small business and you don't have the money to fund 100 Harvard law graduates who can work every which way of the United States tax code to make sure that you pay zero in federal income taxes every year and move all of your money around in foreign bank accounts that are completely untracked, you actually do pay a substantial amount of your income in taxes on top of having to pay employers, on top of having to fund your own health insurance, because we don't have a Medicare for all system. Hence why a system like that would benefit small businesses, actually. But that being said, I feel like the language of capitalism is always coaxed and spoken about in terminology of small businesses, because if they do that, you will always have small business support, because you can pick any individual small business owner, whether they own a record store or a coffee shop or a restaurant, and they will sit there and say, yeah, I'm getting fucked on my taxes. And when in reality, they're not about to rewrite the tax code to make sure that small businesses pay less taxes, although they might. It's entirely another corporate handout that's masked under this notion of the small business. And that's just to say, I'm not even getting into all the, complexities and nuance and issues that are with small businesses. I mean, maybe you all have some, but
it feels like small businesses too are really good at converting people into being sort of like conservative about like business issues and labor rights and things like that. I've seen a lot of people on Facebook, like waiters and things, that don't even have like a vested interest in their business, at least like capitally, right? Saying things like, no, I don't want the minimum wage to go up. If that goes up, they're just going to cut my hours. You know what I mean? There's people out there who like fully embrace these like capital ideas. You know what I mean? I feel like the small business, it tends to make those types of
small
reactions.
business. I mentioned it earlier. I mean, small businesses. Anyone who's ever worked for a small business has been subject to it's almost patronizing when you're aware of how the economy works and how finance works and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. You're immediately bombarded with this notion of family. Yeah, we're a family.
Yeah, we're a team.
We're a team. We're a family. You're not my waiter. You're my, you're basically my fucking sister. Yeah. Well, it's like, bitch, if I'm basically your fucking sister or your brother or your aunt or your uncle,
why are you
pay me
my wages.
Pay me some, a real living wage.
Exploiting
but the average waiter isn't a fucking Marxist, right?
Yeah.
So like they get that dopamine release of like, wow, someone likes me and appreciates the work I do, and they defend to the hilt someone who is completely fucking them over on a day-to-day basis.
But I think it's important to note like how that hierarchy or that situation of hierarchy is so normalized under neoliberal capitalism.
Yeah. Well, and I guarantee all of those waiters, before they worked for Joe Schmo's, pub and grub, fucking was working at an Applebee's or working at a Carrabba's or some chain, and it was inarguably worse.
Yeah,
like
it was the same thing, just it was for a big corporation,
right? And they didn't get that constant like pat on the butt of like, hey, good job, man.
Yeah, with no class analysis, it's easy to like fall into that trap. But another thing I think is important to mention with that neoliberal sort of rugged individualism is this idea that I think a lot of the American working class has been sold, that like you can kind of rise through the ranks. Or obviously we all are familiar with the American dream,
right, of course.
The American dream is to become a small business owner and, have a white picket fence and a home and a, you know what I mean? Like it's kind of laid into the foundation of what it means to be an American or a successful American is to literally become an exploiter, become like a hierarchical class position over some other people or class, and oftentimes like be kind of like condescending or gloating or about it. But what's more than that, I think, is like what gets the working class to sort of distance themselves in this country, at least, from any real coherent class analysis is this like rugged individualism that makes people think if they just work hard enough that they'll become a capitalist too. Like that they can just move through these class ranks or move through these class categories like with ease, and so that fundamentally makes capitalism fine, or like the end of history, or like that is the only system that works. And I think that is what kind of blurs the lines. It really starts at this small business ideology.
Yeah, and I think too, I mean, America itself and the American economy is built on a fairy tale. I mean, we tell stories to ourselves about the way the world actually works. And because of that, Americans have an insane, grandiose level of optimism about where the future is headed and what their place in it is. And also, it especially rings true when we look at the economy. We don't talk about giant moguls of industry as horrid fucking tyrants. We talk about, oh, they started as this and they
had
rose
a good
up.
idea.
Right, and it's like, yeah, I'm sure it had nothing to do with their parents owning a fucking South African diamond mine. It had nothing to do with the fact that, they owned like gigantic plantations for years and years and years and used all that like cotton wealth to
slave labor
to fuel a auto manufacturing.
I only came to America with 25 grams of emeralds in my pocket.
Right, yeah, exactly. And this is the thing. It's like, I remember in college, there was this guy who sat next to me in my calculus class, and I actually did become, friends with him. I actually tutored him in that class. And he had like such a deep fascination, especially with Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. And he felt like, they were always civil to one another and they did all this stuff. And they had just great ideas, and that's how they rose to the top. And he wanted to really emulate them. And it was like a constant struggle. Obviously, like, I liked this guy as a person, but like it annoyed the ever living fuck out of me that I'm like, do you not understand like how many people they lied, cheated, undercut, already had a backbone of wealth at their disposal to do all of these things? Same with Zuckerberg, same with what's his name?
Elon Musk.
Yeah, I mean, Elon
all
Musk,
them,
who I referenced.
yeah.
I mean, all of them. They, Bezos. Bezos didn't. He started Amazon in his garage. Yeah, with the small loan of $250,000 from like. Come on, now.
You gotta look into these stories.
I mean, and the place where I think that was so highlighted and it was used so horrendously opportunistically by the Democratic Party was when Trump said, a small loan of $1 million from my dad.
That's just normal.
But like the Democratic Party was like, a small loan, as literally Nancy Pelosi sits on $1 billion fucking dollars.
Yeah.
As their entire party caters to the exact same class in this country, but they had an opportunity to highlight the mentality of like what Trump is and what he represents of the ruling class society in America, which is they themselves believe that they're hard workers.
Yeah.
They themselves believe that they've been through struggle. When in reality, those people who have been at the very, very fucking bottom and rose to the top are so rare and few and far between, and they're also giant fucking class traders.
Yeah.
One last thing to hit on, we were talking a little bit about small business owners, right? I feel like the core dynamic is that these people who own these companies are owner-operators, right?
Yeah.
They're people who are job creators. Job creators. Every time that you're sitting around for 5 minutes not doing work, every time that you waste cheese, or that was actually a complaint at one of my companies I worked at before, was, hey guys,
cheese.
This month there was 30 pounds of missing cheese.
Yeah.
We need you guys to stop snacking on that cheese in between making
Stop
the
using
pizzas.
too much coffee creamer in the break room.
But these small businesses, they take it personally. Every time something happens where something's wasted, whether it's like justified or not, they take it personally. You know what I mean? When business gets slow and you're not there to help try to muster on, they're upset. You know what I mean? And that's the thing that's sort of, for me personally, kind of heinous about small businesses. Like Jared said before, it creates like a family environment where like if someone calls you and says, hey, so-and-so called out, I need you to cover a shift, and you say, nah.
Right.
They get mad at you. They're like, why?
Yeah,
what are you doing?
You
like,
wanna,
what is going on? You know, what do you have to do? You know,
they look at you as like a number, like as you should just expect to like want to follow every whim just to get those crumbs.
Yeah, exactly. And once you leave, they'll fucking never talk to you again. But I think we were kind of dipping in a little bit to sort of the large business environment. I think like when you're on Facebook and you're scrolling through all your friends and checking out what they've been doing for the last few years, you tend to see a lot of the ones at big corporations are the ones who tend to brag about their company culture and all that type of shit. When you go on LinkedIn, that's all it is. Just like, check out this company culture.
And everyone else tries to emulate
that. Well,
that's
such a big thing for like neoliberal technocrats. Like they're all concerned about like company culture and like company like environments and like all these different like aesthetic things that really don't represent any type of justice or anything in terms of economics.
36.2% of people work at firms that are larger than 2,500 people. So there's a large portion of the workforce that's working at small businesses, we already talked about, but there's also a huge portion of people that are working at these large corporations.
Right.
So like what is exactly part of this sort of like idealized company culture, and like what are the sort of limitations to that?
I mean, I think like you see this notion of like company culture, like places like your Netflixes, your Facebooks, your Google, like they all really emphasize like company culture like extremely heavily. Like, oh, you can play games and you can play video games
table
on your
tennis.
Yeah, whatever. But the whole point of it is to keep you in the office even longer than you normally would at like a regular desk job, right? And I think there's a lot of places, both private and public, that try and emulate that as much as they can, which what it's doing is giving the worker the illusion that they have a very open and free and democratic work environment where they can come and go as they please, when in reality, instead of working an 8-hour day, they're working a 12-hour day, Monday through Saturday, you know? And it's
and they think they love their job.
Right, exactly. Well, and that's another thing is a lot of people don't know what's happening. And the second that they do become more consciously aware of it, as what's recently happened with Google, is employees try and unionize. And the second Google finds out about it, they fire all of them.
Well, wasn't there like a big company recently that, I think it was like Samsung or something? They got their CEO and a bunch of their board members were indicted or something like that in a union busting scandal. Did you guys hear about that?
I haven't heard of that, no.
I'm not sure if it was.
But
like
I mean,
Samsung.
if what we just talked about though, trying to have this like particular company culture, but when the workers become aware of it and try and unionize, crack down on it, it's happened with Google, it's happened with Apple, it's happened with Facebook, it's happened with Blizzard, it's happened with you name it, it's happened.
Yeah. Employee perks are never like a favor. 100% every time you get a new perk, it's because it's means tested and they know it's going to have a positive impact on productivity. That's all they care about. If there's anything that was actually going to help you out or wasn't going to increase your productivity, they don't give a shit. They're never going to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We've talked a little bit about company culture, especially like large company culture, but there's sort of like a new economy that's being created at the moment. And I was actually pretty surprised to learn that about a third of employees in 2018 had been employed by some sort of gig service, right? Like your Airbnbs, your like Lyft, and all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
So what exactly is this gig economy and how does it impact workers?
Well, it's kind of like a work as you go type thing. And again, it's another thing that gives you the illusion of like the independence and the voluntariness of it. When in reality, you see the rise of it with, again, what someone like Bernie Sanders has been talking about for years and years and years is stagnant wage growth. With the downfall of unions, with the advent of neoliberalism, there hasn't been like real concrete wage growth in the United States that has gone on par with productivity for years and years and years and years. And so these sort of supplemental gig economies are kind of a means to, again, make people feel like, hey, not only do I have autonomy and I'm not working a second job, it's not like I have to work at this call center and McDonald's. I work at I work at Progressive, and then when I leave Progressive, I got a couple extra hours to spare. I'll go do some Ubers. I'll do some Lyfts. That'll pay for my groceries.
Or my gas.
And it gives you this false notion of autonomy, and continues to reinforce stagnant wage growth.
Uber hasn't increased their like pay rate.
No,
the more profitable they come, or Lyft or whoever,
and the more profitable they become, the more they will cut corners.
Like they really don't have to if you think about it, because like the gig economy, quote unquote, allows them to literally like take like rapacious advantage of the people that they quote unquote employ, because they really don't even employ the people.
Yeah,
it's like
it's your car,
it's like
it's your stuff.
it's an ad hoc, like it's kind of like, you know, play as you go kind of thing. And I think the most important like phrase that really sticks out when I think of the gig economy is this idea of be your own boss. That's like a huge recruitment drive or recruitment like slogan for a lot of these like Uber and Lyft and things like that. Like be your own boss.
Yeah.
But really, like you're not really getting to be your own boss, because you're not setting your own fare. You're not setting like the stipulations of your, you know, routes, or you're not choosing your clients. You're not really having any control over any of it.
But you're still taking all the risk because it's
your car,
and it's your repairs that are needed, and it's you who's responsible.
And if you
for the
lose
gas.
money on it, then like that's it.
It's really insidious to think about like how just like brainwashing it is to like get really down and dirty with the neoliberal rugged individualist ideology, especially in an economic sense, because that type of ideology like evangelizes stuff like Uber and Lyft and the gig economy.
It feels like it feels like it's the next level of like, this is not right to work, but this is free will. This is like I can work whenever I want to, and I make money off of it.
It's fake autonomy. It's like what Jared was saying. It's like this fake artificial sense of autonomy that really tries to obfuscate the hierarchy inherent to capital.
It's also marketed in a particular way that is also disingenuous, where it's like, oh, I'm an Uber driver, but I drive Uber because like I want to get some extra money to buy a really expensive gift for my family member for Christmas. So I'm going to do some Uber rides, or I want to do that. Not I literally must do these Uber rides on the side, or I will not have enough fucking money to feed my children on the weekend.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Ironically, it's actually a better example of extracting value than I think traditional companies are.
Yes,
because
definitely.
you take all the risk, like you said.
Yeah.
You own the means of production, essentially.
Yeah.
Like you own the car. The only thing the company is doing is just facilitating the exchange.
Right.
The infrastructure.
And because of that, they take a cut. They get a huge cut.
That's,
you know what I mean?
And that's like the contradiction within like this idea of like be your own boss, because absolutely fucking not. Like you're not in any sense your own boss when you do Uber or Lyft.
They make money no matter what. You know what I mean? Even if you have to drive miles and miles unpaid because like your last person was too drunk to figure out that Orlando was fucking 25 miles away from where you are.
It's a super insidious, malign example of
they make
like
their money,
surplus value
you lose
extraction.
Out.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Precisely.
You know, before we even talk more in depth about having a job, one huge element of having a job, of course, is getting a job.
Yeah.
Right? And there's a lot of tropes, I think, that go around in memes and things like that are really true about getting jobs. So, like, what are some common gripes that you guys have heard? Like, for example, just to start off here, I've heard a lot about, like, favoritism. That's one thing I always hear. And working as a recruiter, I know that's true. I know that, like, sometimes jobs are posted with people in mind. Like, we know who we're going to hire. We know that person's coming in.
Well, there are all types of bias in terms of, like, not only minority groups, but, like, oppressed people in society. Like, take, for example, we've all heard the situation where there's a woman at work and there's a male counterpart that has the same position as her. When the man emails someone, the customer is less likely to get snippy and angry and doubt their competency when they think they're speaking to a man.
Right.
Whereas like they'll go an extra mile, a lot of people, to really try to invalidate or belittle a woman in a professional position because they think that they can bust them down or break them down. And there are also examples that we've talked about, I think previously, in terms of like bias in hiring.
Yeah.
Like I think there was a study done, like I'm not sure, we'll if I find it we can include it in the show notes, but I'm sure people have heard about this idea where like if you have a black sounding name like Jamal, you know what I mean, or like something very, very stereotypical, you're less likely to be called for an interview than someone like a John Smith, or you know what I mean?
Right.
Like just something that's very
that
like
study,
white.
that study's actually been replicated many, many times, and the results are usually pretty consistent.
Yeah.
Is that if you have an ethnic sounding name, you get less callbacks, So you
Yeah.
don't even have access to the workplace, which is probably the most heinous version of
right
of oppression that we're going to talk about in this episode.
Right. I mean, well, also too, it's like I've worked in places before where a job was posted strictly for legal reasons, and the person who was going to be hired was already going to be hired, which, I mean, is fine in some instances, and in other instances it's not. But I think another thing is more, you open a job position and you have 150 fucking applicants, and the things that a lot of times companies are looking for are so specific and so nuanced and so detailed that someone who's trying to get an entry-level foot in the door is just completely fucked. Like there's no way that they're going to really be able to sell themselves. And also too, in terms of people being marginalized like throughout the process, I mean, I've seen interviews in the past for places I've worked at where the person who was being hired or could have been hired was perfectly capable of doing the job, but they had Asperger's or something like that, and therefore their ability to read social cues was slightly inhibited, and because it made the hiring manager feel awkward, or because part of the duties of the role involved them being public-facing, they wouldn't hire them. And
I mean, obviously that's discrimination,
right?
But there's,
I can't believe Coca-Cola would do that.
I mean, there's there's incentives for like capitalists to act that way too, which is another part of the problem.
Well, think about it. If you're hiring for a sales position and there's someone who's extremely qualified to do that, or it doesn't have to be sales, any public facing position, and there's someone who's perfectly qualified to have done that, but maybe they have a particular disability or something, or they have Asperger's, or I'm just using that as an example, that makes them have a little bit of difficulty reading social cues, but for the most part, is still perfectly qualified to handle that. The notion to the hiring person is this person is not going to generate as much profit as
an able-bodied
person, and therefore we are not going to hire them.
Yeah, Jared, you raised so many good points. Like earlier, you were kind of like almost saying the phrase that you see on all the memes is like, you have to have experience to get experience.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, like $15 an hour requires master's degree. What happened to the economy?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, well, you don't have experience, so that's what we're going to hire you. What? And they can get away with that. Going through like very professional and very needed jobs, they can do that same excuse, To get back to what you were saying in terms of like discrimination is like, you got to keep in mind that these are just like normal people. A hiring manager, a recruiter, they're just like normal people. They just they want to get their shit done as soon as possible. They don't want to think about it. They don't want to cause issues. Yeah. And that does create a lot of discrimination because people are cutting corners all the time.
Well, it's normalized.
People are just like, we could hire the Asperger's guy, and then we got to tell HR, and we got to find some accommodations, and we got to talk to them about it, and we got to let's just hire the other person.
Yeah, but these things are normalized within like business environments, especially with your experience in HR, and they become so normalized that people just don't even start to question how they're marginalizing people or how they're, biased or ableist or things like that. But I'm sure all of us have seen in the news or issues like that where you have like a company that has like a lot of employees who have Down syndrome or some type of a disability, and then the company like goes public about saying like, yeah, we pay them $250 an hour because we don't feel like their labor is worth that of an able-bodied person.
A lot of them get like tax kickbacks too. You know what I mean? So
for
it's just fill it out.
Every time you get a job, like a lot of the times, especially the retail or like a lot of like just regular jobs, like minimum wage jobs, things like that, you actually have to go through a process where I forget what it's called, but they ask you if you have disabilities or it's some like Disabilities Act, and if the company employs you with a disability, they get some type of a tax write-off or a tax break. I mean, that's built into the law. You know what I mean?
Well, because that's the only way they're going to get them to hire people like that. If that was not under capitalism, if that was not in place, capitalist business owners would be like, fuck off.
But we wouldn't need things like that. We wouldn't need these like fundamentally discriminatory things if we produced fundamentally for need rather than competition and profit.
If we had a universal jobs guarantee program, which has only ever been accomplished under a socialist system, any person who wanted work, who could work, would be given that right. And you know what's interesting is,
but they would be provided for too, even if they couldn't work.
Yes, exactly. And that's the thing is, even when they do a lot of like interviews and stuff with people who they did like this whole series on BBC, which made me hate capitalism even more, honestly, about people who have a variety of like learning disabilities or social
I know
struggles.
what you're talking about.
Trying to get employment, and like they all so desperately just want to work because they want to feel normal. Like they want to feel like they want to do something.
Who doesn't want to feel fulfilled?
Right,
like labor is fulfilling.
Right.
You know what I mean? When you're doing something you want to do of your own volition.
And so they want that, but like it's such a struggle because the way that our society is structured, what they are able to contribute to a company is not viewed as profitable.
But that's because of the intense competition that the mode of production itself creates.
Right.
So capitalism, like listeners, you guys have to understand, capitalism is creating these competitions, these micro competitions, these macroeconomic competitions. When we talk about favoritism in the workplace, workers are competing with each other. That's what we consider atomization and alienation, like we talk about in our first episode.
It feels like the process of getting a job sometimes is so difficult that it disincentivizes you to do it again.
Right.
Once you're in your current role, you're like, fuck,
especially
I
like,
do not want to get on the job search
especially
again.
if you like lose your health care because you change jobs, you know.
Right, yeah.
That's a big talking point of like Bernie's campaign. Like why is it fair that you lose your medical insurance if you change jobs? Like
you don't want to take time off to find another job because that could be detrimental.
All
know
of
what
these
I mean?
things
could kill you.
Are engineered to benefit the ruling class so that we stay in these type of positions and allow us to be exploited.
Even interviewing itself it feels like a full-time job. I mean, a lot of people put in 100 applications and get like 2 or 3 callbacks on all these things. And it takes time. You know what I mean?
Right.
And if you're a working person and you hate your job and you're going to take the neoliberal advice of go find something better, that takes like a serious effort. Like you have to be disciplined, come home, fill out 5 applications, and then go to fucking bed, get up the next day and do that shit all over again while working.
And that's time you could be doing chores, cooking, doing laundry, going shopping, all these things that you need to do, but like have to kind of fit it in your 8 hours that you have.
We all know people who have been putting off changing jobs for years.
Years.
Yep. Every one of you knows somebody who is just like, I know I hate it and I complain about it every Friday night when we go out to get in beer, but like I just don't want to really find something else. There's really nothing else in the area. And that's a pretty common thing. I think we can kind of like all relate to that. And I think too, kind of circling back here, is that it creates an environment where like we're kind of cynical. Like once you have a job and you're in this role and you have a title, it sort of makes you feel like this is how it should be.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Oh, yeah, of course you're struggling. You just got out of high school. Yeah, it's going to take you a few years before you've landed on your feet. You know, you got to get out there and get your experience.
Normalized it.
Yeah. And it completely normalizes this process that feels like when you're doing it, it's just like insane and evil.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like I feel like becomes completely normalized. So once you're in a role, you're not in any sort of home stretch. You know what I mean? There's always going to be constant challenges. And I think one of the huge constant challenges is this sort of like universal idea of scientific management, right? That's
exactly
productivity. That's quotas.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? That's like if you're a cashier, they want you to have 7 good surveys before the end of the day. Or, you know, if you're fucking, working in a call center, you need to take care of everything within 6 minutes because if you go above that, that's too long. And that's going to fucking kill our productivity and stuff like that. So like these sort of like, these principles of scientific management really cause sort of like a kind of like a struggle for workers. You know what I mean? Do you guys have any experiences with those?
Yeah, I mean retail. So I've worked in heavily sales-driven retail where, you know, I mean this was jobs that, you know, I was working while I was going to school full-time, and why that actually is actually more difficult and why it really pisses me off when people are obviously like shitty to retail workers and, you know, kind of write them off is because retail, you always kind of start as something like I need this paycheck and like I'm just going to do this and it should be easy, when in fact the work is really hard, especially when it comes to the fact that you must make sales. And if you don't make sales, the upper management views that as bad management. So they come down even harder on management when sales aren't made, even in times when it's going to be impossible to make the sales goal. and they crack down on the lower level managers who then become ruthless in the workplace because their job's on the line. And so it's overall just a very uptight, miserable place. The second they see you with your phone, they can send you home.
It's
I mean, it's
gamification. It makes your job a game. It's like, you got to get these numbers, and if you don't get these numbers, we're going to fucking fire you.
Right.
You're going to go home.
But you're a family, and here's these Krispy Kreme donuts that we brought in on
holidays.
Come in
for the shift. Please come in for the shift.
Mandatory pizza party, like whatever. Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's particularly... in those kind of jobs, I think in the fast food industry, I think in any of those, I mean, even if you work up the lane, if you're in anything sales related, if you're in anything private sector related, I mean, my field of work in the private sector is very much like that. It's very micromanaged. It's all sales driven. You're a salesperson in my field in the private sector because you have to say, these are the projects I've worked on and these are how many successes I've had. And this is why you should take our bid for this project. And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then your boss is cracking down on your level of productivity because you have to have billable hours. If you don't have money to bill your time to, or you've ran it all up and you haven't met all the stuff that was in your contract, then that means your company could potentially lose money, and that could lead to you getting fired.
Yeah, I found a statistic that said that 70% of workers feel like there's too much on their plate, which is pretty crazy. It's like, how do we live in a supposedly stable economy where 70% of people feel like they're doing too much?
Right.
You know what I mean? That's insane to me. And like, I think a lot of this relates back to something we've talked about previously, which is that there is a constant need for growth, right?
Yes.
And that's the idea that like we need to be increasing every year. We need to be increasing profits by 3%, right? And if you're not increasing revenue, like a store, like a big store, they know for a fact next year they're not going to increase their revenue by 3%.
Right.
Walmart knows they're going to make 3% more sales next year.
Right.
So where do you go? The next thing is labor, right?
Right,
Well,
yeah.
like, okay, we've cut the labor down as much as we did. What can we do after that? You make people more productive. You know what I
Right.
mean? And this is what pushes these companies for these like productivity quotes.
Mm-hmm.
I was blown away one time, a cashier at Speedway, right, which is a gas station.
Yeah.
But they have their workers try to sell these like rewards cards.
Yes.
And I asked about it one time, and
7-Eleven's
I'm like,
the same way.
you ask me every time, and I say no, and like, you know me, like, why do you keep asking? And they were like, oh, because we have to get a certain amount, like 15% or whatever. I'm making up a number, but this amount of percent needs to be all in rewards transactions. We need like a certain amount of people to take these rewards cards for me to essentially keep my job. And it's like, that's insane. You know what I mean? They've like, again, made your job a game. You know what I mean? To make life that much more productive.
Well, another one too is like, because retail sales as a whole are down because of Amazon, basically a lot of retail places that you go to, their new huge thing is credit cards, with insanely high interest rates. Any single person you see working in cash register at any fucking employer that or retail giant or company that offers a credit card, they have a quota they make. If they come back and they haven't met that quota at the end of the day, they're getting a warning. If they get 3 warnings, they're fired.
Yeah. Have you ever seen those like sometimes they give you a survey on the pen pad? Have you ever gotten that before? There's some stores where like when you swipe your credit card, it'll ask you like, was the cashier nice to you?
Right.
And it's
right.
You're like awkwardly like, yes, like is this person gonna get fired if I put no? Like, and that's exactly what that is. That's a measure of productivity. That's what they're doing. You know what I mean?
It's like tattletaling.
Yeah. They want the customers to tattletale,
It's like the Tekashi 6ix9ine of scientific management.
Well, and think about it too. When they give out those surveys, even when you go to some like a department store, it's like, oh, please take the time to fill out our survey so my manager knows how well I did, blah, blah, blah. The only people who fill that shit out are people who are pissed off. People who had a horrible experience.
Yeah.
No one's going to be like, wow, Cassandra helped me so much today find Super Mario Maker 2. I'm going to take the time to really make sure she gets a good review. Fuck no one does that.
So I think like productivity is one huge thing that a lot of workers are facing at all times, even if they're not aware. But another part too is like constant employee monitoring, right? Like a lot of people aren't aware that like your employer can look up like all the activity on your computer at any one point and be like, hey, well, you did this one thing for 15 minutes and that's a write-up.
Right, yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like
you access Facebook, fired.
Right. Yeah, like a lot of your day is spent like being monitored by your employee or your employer rather. I think another thing besides just putting like software on your computer to monitor what you're doing is like peer reviews. You know what I mean? Do you ever get those when you're working on a project?
Oh yeah.
And people are like, oh, how was Karen? Was
Right,
Karen
right,
okay? How much work did Karen actually do in this project? And you know they're asking the same questions.
Yeah, but my
your
thing
other
with that
employees,
is if
you know?
all your other fucking coworkers don't put a 5 out of 5, they're a fucking scab
They're a
and
narc.
yeah, need to be treated like shit in the workplace.
Yeah. They
Yeah.
need that Tekashi 6ix9ine treatment.
I've literally worked on projects where someone did absolutely fucking nothing and I still gave them a 5 out of 5
Yeah.
because guess what? It don't fucking affect me. It ain't my fucking money. Fuck off.
Bless you.
Yeah.
Bless you, Jared.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's the thing.
Bless.
It's just, I guess the point of this whole segment is like every little thing at your work is all designed to maximize the amount of value that they're going to
Yes.
extract from you. You know
Well,
what I mean?
it's like another thing too is even going back to retail, and this is a way that I feel like it relates to employees being monitored by their bosses. Is going back to retail, we were always just harped on for if there was shrink, which means theft.
Yeah.
You know, oh, we had this much stolen from this department, and those workers working at those times would get reprimanded for it, or not reprimanded in a way where it's like you need to do a better. It would be like, hey,
Keep an
I
eye out.
understand you're working, blah blah. It's like when I worked retail, I didn't give a fuck. What? Oh, I'm sorry. You're trying to steal $750 worth of shit from Kohl's. I don't fucking give a shit. You know what I mean? I don't see a dime of that. They're paying me $8.25 an hour. You know what I'm gonna do? $8.25 an hour. I'm gonna fold these fucking towels. That's what Jared. That's bleep that out.
That's what Jerome Lefebvre is gonna do.
That's what Jerome Lefebvre is gonna do. Fold these fucking towels.
I actually thought that Kohl's just paid you in like Kohl's cash. You know what I mean?
You do get Kohl's cash. You do get Kohl's cash on top of your
I wish
discount.
somebody paid me in Kohl's cash. I wish somebody paid me in Trident layer.
Another thing about work is that work doesn't just stop when you clock out.
No.
Like I think work has a lot to do with identity, and it has a lot to do with your life sort of outside of work. Like what you do is going to dictate, or how long you work, for example, is going to dictate a lot about what your life looks like outside of work, of course,
right,
of your labor. So like what exactly, or do you guys have any examples where you've seen work tied to identity before?
I mean, well, multiple things. I think on the one hand, you know, that's kind of the reason why a lot of people go to college. I mean, obviously they go to college with the intent like, hey, I want to get a degree so I can get a job, but you want to get a specific degree because you want to have a job that is meaningful to you and that you care about and you're passionate about. So in that way, it's tied to your identity, especially considering that when you work a full-time job, you spend more time in the workplace than you do with your friends, family, and that's the way it's going to be until the day you fucking drop dead. And so it's very difficult for identity not to be tied to what it is that you do. I mean, but it varies for some people. You know, like in my case, like I'm proud of the work that I do. I mean, I like what I do for a living. My biggest issues with what I do for a living have to do with fucking capitalism. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not like the actual field of work.
It's a distribution of resources and who owns, like who gets to appropriate
right.
them.
And the reason things get frustrating in my line of work are specifically because of the powers that be set up by extremely corrupt moneyed interests. But I mean, what I do, I feel like is tied to my identity. But I feel like in that respect, even if you hate what you fucking do for a living, if you do it 40 hours a week, it's inseparable from your identity because you will spend more time working for someone else's money till the day you die than you will ever spend time with your family, friends, and so on.
A lot of times the first thing that you talk about, you know, when you meet somebody, especially if it's just like a cold, like, oh, hi, like my name's Nathan.
What do you do?
What do you do? A lot of the times the first thing you ask is like, what do you do? And you mean it in a professional sense. Like if someone asks me what I do, I'm not going to say like, I'm a gamer, sometimes I'm a podcaster, blah, blah, blah. No, I'm going to be like, oh yeah, I work in like HR, I do a lot of recruiting type
it's
of stuff.
coded. You know they're not asking you what you care about.
And that's such a common conversation, you know what I mean? Like even when I think of you guys, I think of like, oh, Jared does planning, oh, Matt does IT, I do HR, oh, what a cool balance. We have so many things that we all do.
Right,
and it's like, why? Like isn't there more to a person than just like what they do during the day?
I mean, there are
you know
definitely a lot more to each of us than like what we do.
But that's such an easy category for me to just put my to wrap my
Well,
brain
and
around
I
of
think-
what we do, you know?
And that's a good point, and it's a good thing what Matt just said, because it made me think, like, if you, like, how we know each other is as friends, right? Like,
Yeah.
I know you guys based on your interests. I know you guys on what we like to do together in social settings, right?
Right.
Because that's what defines our connection with one another. I don't think of you as the job that you do. I don't think of
right.
Matt as the job that he does. I don't think most people think of other people in terms of what their job title is, but we are conditioned exactly as you just said because of how much fucking time we spend working when we'd rather be socializing.
And we've all been there, and like I made these same judgments, so I'm not trying to say that it's a bad thing, but like sometimes when someone comes to you and they don't really have a job, or they're like, yeah, I just kind of bounce around, deliver pizzas this week, and then I do Uber for like a few months, and then
or
blah,
if
blah, blah.
or if they say I'm an actor,
and you kind of like, and I'm saying this is me.
I do it too.
I kind of look down on them. I go like, "Oh, you didn't know what you want to do? Yeah, well, okay. Well,
but I mean, that's
cool.
the conditioning of capitalism, socially, and neoliberal ideology that's making you do that.
And I'm actually glad you said that, and you're honest about that, because all of us in this room have had that experience. We're all
conditioned to think that way.
And I this is my thing that pisses me off about the left when they act like you kind of think having even these thoughts is like classist or class, or it's like. I don't know how many times I have to fucking state this shit, and it has to do with when we're talking about everything from the way we view other people in relation to the work that they do, whether it has to do with race and racism in the United States. You cannot grow up in this system and not have prejudices, biases,
absolutely,
negative thoughts towards this person, that person. It's even if you are the most hardened, adamant leftist with the hottest takes possible. You cannot grow up in this system the way that it is, go through all of its conditioning up to 18 years old, and then expect all of that to be gone within, I don't know, 4 years, 6 years of college or something like that. It's just not, it's not fucking possible.
Yeah.
It's literally not possible. It would take a lifetime of being a leftist to even break ground on like leftist theory and leftist knowledge, and you still would not have deconditioned yourself from what this thing produces.
I mean, I think now we can all agree that, at least I believe that all labor has intrinsic value.
All of it. Yeah.
And the productivity of the individual is not tied to their worth.
Right.
They're separate things, and everybody has intrinsic worth to not only themselves, but their labor, regardless of their productivity.
Right. But at the end of the day, like, as we were talking about earlier, like, yeah, I'm a planner and I like planning, but I like planning in the sense that it's a decent job compared to what a lot of other fucking jobs could be. You know what I mean? Like, at the end of the day, I do it to put food on my table and housing over my head.
Well, that
you know?
in and of itself is sort of a competition, because we like have been sort of bred and conditioned to, see competition as some type of a normal thing, when really, like, a society would be more healthy if we just all viewed all labor as intrinsically valuable. You've seen the political cartoon where like the mother is like telling the kid that's looking at a street sweeper to be like, you better go to school or you're going to become that. And it's like, little do they know, but that man has, or that person has a union job and makes a good wage, you know what I mean? And has a good standard of living because their work is valuable to society. Like, and it should be that way. We should think of all labor as valuable. And if we did, our society would be more healthy.
Well, also think too, if tomorrow all of the garbage workers across the United States, or all of the janitors across the United States, or what have you, some job that's looked down upon, went on strike, went on a massive general strike, it would shut down parts of the economy.
Yeah.
I mean, it would dismember a portion of the United States economy. It would severely hinder it. It would stop the system from running and operating as smoothly as it normally does. If all of the fucking bankers went on strike tomorrow, crickets.
Yeah.
If the ruling class went on strike tomorrow, all of them said, hey, I'm not going to be a CEO anymore, crickets. Nothing would change, because the system is not propelled by those people. It's propelled by those people who say, hey, I'm a this worker, I'm a that worker,
that
and you
do
scoff
the actual
at them.
work.
Right,
that run the packages, that deliver the packages, that take the garbage to the dump, that, work in hospitals and nurses and all these people. Those are the type of people that make the world run.
Right.
Yeah. And to add just a few numbers in here, right? I know we love numbers.
Right.
To kind of see how being unemployed, not having a purpose, can kind of affect your life. Gallup found that you're twice as likely to be depressed if you're short-term unemployed, like under a year you haven't had a job, and you're 3 times as likely to be depressed if you haven't had long-term unemployment, like if you haven't been employed for a year, which is crazy. You know what I mean? If you don't have a purpose, you fall apart, you know? It's very, very sad.
Well, and I think a lot of us find purpose through work, which in itself could be a discussion for a whole nother topic.
Sounds dystopian as fuck.
Yeah, but that's just the reality because we're all required to do it. Like, therefore, we have to, we hold a sense of purpose to what we do.
Like, bringing it back around to, like, what we initially talked about, like, why we have to work. It's not that human beings don't necessarily want to work or produce, and it's not necessarily the case that under a communist society or a socialist society that people would just all of a sudden stop working just because their needs are accounted for in a different type of mode of production. People want to work. Like, human beings naturally find fulfillment and creative power and energy in, you know, producing and laboring.
Yeah.
Try laying in bed for a week straight.
Right, yeah.
You can't do it. You're going to get up and you're going to get something done.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's the type of work that I wish we could do more of.
Right.
You know what I mean? The type of shit that, like, if you didn't have to pay bills, what would you be doing?
Right.
You know what I mean? Everybody wants to work. Just we don't want to work for, like, someone who's going to extract all our value.
Well, it's like, think about
it. Give us a job that we don't want to do.
Right.
You know?
But even, like, you know, say all of our jobs were automated tomorrow and we lived in a fully automated gay luxury space communism, you know, all of us have played in bands before. Playing music, getting guys together to write shit and play in front. I mean, that's a form of labor.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, but it's something you're willing to put time to and put the time in because it's something you enjoy. It's a form of labor you enjoy.
I mean, this podcast is a perfect example.
Yeah, we're not making any fucking money
we're
off
not,
of it.
We're not making money off of this.
I mean, George Soros bucks.
Right, well,
besides that,
George Soros helps
Soros
out.
bucks.
But I mean, it's like, and this shit is time consuming. It's not easy to do. We're all like, oh, we got to sit here and write this fucking outline. You know what I mean? But it's like, but when we get together and we're riffing on shit and we're talking leftist politics and even just having those few people comment and be like, damn, like I learned a lot from this, or I really enjoyed this episode. That's keeps us chugging the fuck along, you know? So it's like humans are innately that way. Like they're going to do things whether or not their engineering job gets turned over to a machine or what have you. They're still going to find a means to continue laboring.
There's value in it regardless of like a value form or like a money or a currency. Like, you know, people don't always have to be incentivized by money. Like oftentimes people, especially like in creative fields, like the money is like nice, but it's really like the last thought. I mean, it's the dream to be able to make a living off of your art.
Something you love.
But most artists will tell you they don't go into that to make a living off of it. They go into it because they love it.
They were already doing it when they got famous, you know? I think we've talked a lot about identity. So another aspect is sort of the side effects of work. So what are some side effects? Like, for example, I was thinking of like stress. We all have faced work stress before.
Yeah.
An Everest College survey found that 83% of American professionals are stressed out at their jobs. So I've also seen other studies that have said that stress is more likely to cause you to yell at loved ones, get into accidents, use some sort of healthcare service, like usually mental health services, or miss a day of work even, so you become less productive. So like, what are some examples of times where your job is going to have some sort of side effect on your other life?
I think that in my field, I've noticed there's, especially in the private sector, a lot of alcoholism because I mean, look, I'm guilty of it too. Not necessarily being an alcoholic.
We're
but
drunk
like,
right now.
Yeah, right. But it's like,
really.
it's like, hey, I don't have to work tomorrow and I worked this insane work week. I'm going to fucking get drunk. You know what I mean? Or something.
Yeah.
Which
So
is in and of itself a market drive.
Right.
Like it's intentional. All of these things are engineered intentionally to create conditions.
Right. And but I've seen a lot of alcoholism, a lot of depression, a lot of substance abuse in my field, primarily in the private sector, but I've definitely seen it in the public sector too. When I was in grad school, I felt that was kind of how my life was. Anytime I had any free time, I was spending it getting drunk, doing shit I shouldn't have been doing.
Not thinking.
Just
basically.
because you're so everything possible in your body has been spent. You know what I mean? Like you've spent every brain cell you fucking have trying to, get through the work week or get through school or whatever so that you can be a productive member of society. And I think you see that across the board in a range of fields. People who suffer from a lot of depression or a lot of anxiety. I mean, think about it. If you work a 60, 70-hour work week in the private sector as a planner or an engineer or something, you don't have a lot of time to like come home and decompress. You don't have a lot of time to do stuff around, your house. You might have like a super messy living space. All this shit, like it fucks with you long term. It fucks with you heavily long term.
The other thing I wanted to mention in addition to like work stress is sort of this unsaid thing that a lot of workers are cognizant about but don't really know how to verbalize. It's just how normalized like the hierarchy and oppression is that we don't even consider it oppression anymore. Like we have these ideologues, libertarians, and so on and so forth that tell us, oh, if you don't like your job, just go find another one. You know what I mean? As if like the conditions aren't reproduced across the entire spectrum based on the economic system and for which we produce and distribute commodities for.
Yeah.
So it's like this unsaid thing that kind of obviously everybody has anxieties about. Like even you can kind of sense it like in your employer sometimes too. Like I know that the employers are cognizant that they're like literally reaping surplus value from you. You know what I mean?
Right.
Especially in my company where it's like a lot of the stuff that like any of the management or like the owners do, I do too. And so I think it's clear to them how, I could easily just break off and make my own company had I had the capital to do so.
Well, in a lot of like like in a lot of professions, like something you like, let's say engineering, right? The further up the chain of command you go, the less work you do because you delegate it to more underlings.
Yeah.
I've worked my way up. I'm the manager. I no longer have to work the 70-hour week. I'm going to take the fresh out of a college kid and make him do it and teach him about hard work, and integrity.
That's going back to what I was saying earlier is like it sort of reinforces itself because like once you've been through the whole rigmarole, you look back at it and you go like, well, if you want to get to where you do it, you're going to go through it too.
You have to do it, right?
It justifies the
entire
entire
It's like a badge
system.
of honor. It's like a bullshit badge of honor that people keep, using to reproduce the ideology and jam it down other people's throats as if it's just normal.
And I think another thing too is like what we don't realize throughout this entire process, like while your managers are delegating and while you're slaving, all these hours putting towards, some shit you probably don't even really care that much about. You're not realizing that like the amount of work that you're putting towards something is strictly driven to generate a massive profit. You don't have to work that much to get the same thing done. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's hierarchy.
You want to build roads and bridges, through estate planning, through state planning or something like that. It doesn't require 80 hours of work. It only requires that much when you're a contractor who has 20 different fucking jobs going on at one time, and that happens to be one of them, and you need it to get done. You need it to get closed so a new project can be taken on so you can make more money off of that. I mean, it's the amount of work that we put ourselves through is specifically for the productivity of the system. It has nothing to do with the general welfare of the public. Has nothing to do with our own welfare and well-being.
Or the general wealth of like the individual who is producing it.
And the more that you work and the more you damage your body and all that stuff, you are not actually seeing any of the benefit.
Yeah.
The only potential thing that could kind of sort of materially benefit you, but certainly not nearly to the degree of the bosses or the managers or any of that stuff, is that you hope that your excess work gets noticed and maybe 5 fucking years from now you'll get a promotion or something like that.
Yeah.
But that's about it. Especially like libertarian types or like right-wing people, when they say, oh, you put the hard work in and you work your way up or something. Even if you do land that promotion, you get that extra 10 grand a year or something. You killed yourself to do that so that you can what? Oh yeah, that $10,000 extra a year or something. Divvy that up amongst a 12-month time frame.
Yeah.
That's not that much money. You're not materially benefiting nearly to the degree that the person who owns the corporation or owns the company is just by working all those excess hours, putting in that extra
And
time.
by market logic, sometimes it's just like a lot of people like to say like, well, you make more if you have more to offer.
Right,
You know what I mean?
right.
That seems to be the sort of like general like zeitgeist of how it works. Is like, yeah, of course a doctor makes $300K a year because
Right.
that's what they have to offer. You know, it's worth $300K a year. They wouldn't make that unless it was worth it, right?
Mhm.
And like I feel like that's like it's so misguided. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of like what we said before. Is like even if you're flipping hamburgers, like somebody's going to be flipping hamburgers.
Right.
Shouldn't they have a living wage?
Right.
You know, like why are we going to like play with this?
Well,
like,
let's go further than the living wage. Shouldn't they own the value
part
that
of
they
it? Yeah,
produce?
yeah.
Yeah.
And there's two elements to this. I think like there's a lot of changes that we could be made like within our system to make life just better as is, and then there's just changing the whole system like into socialism. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
And so like I think there's a lot to be said about that, and we don't have a huge amount of time to discuss it.
Right.
But like what are some sort of changes that you guys feel like might sort of help out our system, or what are some things that might be a little bit different in socialism?
I think one, I
Yeah.
mean, it's been talked about so many times throughout previous episodes, it's even been brought up in this one already, is, you know, in a socialist society, having workers own their own labor, meaning that the wealth that they produce is equally, along with other workers, is equally distributed amongst, you know, what it is that they're doing. So the work that they're doing is contributing to a guaranteed right to their housing, their health care, their, you know, basically the reproduction of their labor and their well-being long term, not short term, not to make ends meet for, you know, the certain, you know, allocation of money that's put towards them by a capitalist owner or something. But the fact that they actually own the wealth that they produce, they see a genuine material benefit from it that is long term and has longevity towards it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I hope to see a removal of like meritocracy or bureaucracy. I want to see, you know, an economic system that functions under the pretenses of from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. That's really how I see it. And I want the workers to own the means of their production and reap the value without any hierarchical structure taking a surplus, you know, or extracting a surplus value from them.
And that could also mean too, like, you know, if their needs are met, you know, if you're a worker working towards, you know, say in a socialist society, you know, working for, you know, building roads and bridges or something like that. When the bridge is built, go home. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not like there has to be this constant maneuvering of like over and over and over again working these excess hours, which is all profit driven, you know?
Even on like the larger basis, like one of the things that will never escape in capitalism, as we said in previous episodes, and including earlier in this episode, is like you need that constant growth. Like
Right.
we need
And
to get
competition,
outside
too.
of that paradigm of like, once the bridge is finished, do we need to find another
Right.
bridge to build?
Right.
Do we really need the extra bridge?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, why does it seem that whenever the work is done, there's always more work to be done, and it just compiles
Well,
faster and faster,
right,
grows exponentially
right.
how much work needs to be done?
Right,
Like,
right.
isn't there a point where we can say, like, all needs are met, let's just chill out a
You
little
have
bit?
to think about the goal, like we talked about earlier. Like capitalism, what is the goal of competition? You know, it trends like throughout history. We've seen it repeatedly trend towards monopoly. The goal of capitalism is not to, you know, be fair to all these like individuals who are trying to compete in a market. The point of competition is to win.
Mm-hmm.
The point of competition is not to be equal.
Right.
Like that's the fundamental thing that people need to understand. Like when we're producing for profit to compete with other people, to compete with other private firms, you know, we're producing for the wrong reasons. And it alienates us because we see this hierarchy, or we come to see this hierarchy as some type of innate or some type of an inherent structure in society when it's really not. Like capitalism is like very, very artificial. Like it requires coercion.
It's also very new.
And it's also very not voluntary in any sense of the word.
It begs the question of so many different things. You know, what would a socialist society look like long term? You know, what are these alternatives? And obviously that's a very difficult question, and one that we don't have all the answers to. It certainly would be a struggle for a long time, transitioning. It certainly would reorganize the entire class structure that we have currently in the way wealth and power is distributed throughout a socialist society versus a capitalist one. And, you know, we could talk about things like automation and all that sort of stuff and how it might impact. But I mean, I think that if you're working to complete a need, instead of having, say, a planner who would normally work a 40-hour work week or a 50 or a 60 or a 70-hour work week, depending on whether they're public or private sector, they might only need to work a 20-hour work week or a 15-hour work week. And they're still contributing to the society in which they live. They're still being a planner. They're still being an engineer. They're still being a trash worker. They're still being these things that they feel might give them purpose. But they will also have far more time to spend in social settings, building social labor and social capital amongst, you know, a community amongst themselves.
Yeah, and then the removal of hierarchy too, like it would make society more socially cohesive, and it would allow people to actually develop real bonds and real, you know, solidarity with each other rather than competing with each other, looking at each other for just what they do, basing people's identity and how much respect you should give them based on the money that they make, and just different things like that. But ultimately, it's just a matter of like the hierarchy. We need to have people understand that there is innate hierarchy within a capitalist system, but hierarchy in and of itself is not innate to production and the way that we can satisfy our needs for commodity in society. And I think, you know, from those pretenses, people just need to be more skeptical about the mechanics of the way capitalism functions on a macroeconomic level. Like, think about these things when people tell you them, like it's just voluntary, it's just free trade, like you just hate free trade, like
you hate free enterprise.
Yeah, you hate free enterprise. I mean, it's so much more than just these sound bites, these black and white assumptions that really like ideologues and mythologizers tell you and reproduce in culture. But be speculative about these things, because there's always a benefit to ideology. It's always benefiting one person or one group of people over another. But I think it's time that the workers owned what they produce. Like, the workers built society. Let's be real here.
Mm-hmm.
So we should own it.
Wrap it up.
Good.
You wrap it up.
I'm gonna wrap it up.
Yeah, you wrap it up. You started. You
No,
you led
just
it. You
wrap it
started
up.
it. Wrap
Just
it
be
up.
Wrap it
like,
up.
with that, you know, we
With
want to
that,
thank you.
guys, please check us out on the Facebook.com.
Yeah,
at
We're there.
level left.
The entry level left.
On
You can
Twitter.
check us out on the Twitter as well.
Twitter.
At the entry level.
It's just
left.
at entry
I'm
level
keeping
left.
this in. We're not
Yeah,
redoing
it's
this.
fine.
It's just gonna sound
It's
like
just
this.
at entry level left. We have on our Facebook the entry level left. You can look us up. We have in our About Me section, it's link tree. Anything you want to find from us is in that link tree. Any link to anywhere you want to listen. If you listen on like iTunes or Apple, please rate and give us a review if possible. That really helps our podcast. We do have PayPal. We have a Patreon that if you're interested in supporting us monetarily so we can keep, you know, making these episodes for you guys.
Make our workplace
Yeah.
that much better.
Yeah,
you
make
know?
our workplace better.
Allow us to own the means
Yeah.
of our own labor.
Yeah, essentially just give us money. But
Yeah.
With that, guys, we want to thank you for listening to the Entry Level Left, and we hope you stay tuned for our next episode.
Mwah.